The boy's bike chain snapped on a cold morning near a forgotten laundromat. And that should have been the end of it. Just another broken thing in a world that already looked away. But when a quiet man named Theo knelt down to help, neither of them realized they were about to repair more than a bike. They were about to rebuild a family torn apart by silence, loss, and time. A missing sister, hidden past, and a future no one saw coming. What started with grease-stained hands became something much bigger. Stay with us. This story changes everything. The chain had snapped near the corner of 8th and Larch, just outside the rundown laundromat, with the flickering neon sign that hadn't been fully lit in years. The boy stood there, one hand gripping the rusted handlebars of a bike that looked too small for him, the other holding the loose chain, grease smudged on his fingers and the sleeve of his faded hoodie. He bit his lip, glancing up and down the empty sidewalk as if expecting help to materialize from the early morning mist. He couldn't have been more than 11, lanky and a bit underfed, with the kind of wary eyes that flicked from shadow to motion, always calculating. His shoes were mismatched in wear, one sole flapping slightly as he shifted his weight, the other patched with duct tape. The morning air carried the scent of wet pavement and soap from the laundromat, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked twice and fell silent. "Trouble?" The voice came from behind, deep but kind, cautious, without sounding patronizing. The boy turned sharply, startled, and looked up at the man approaching from across the street. He was in his late 30s, maybe early 40s, with sun-weathered skin and work-worn hands that hung loose at his sides. His jeans were stained at the knees, and his flannel shirt had frayed cuffs. A canvas satchel hung over one shoulder, the kind teachers used, though nothing about him said school. The boy didn't answer right away. He looked at the man, then down at the chain in his hand, then back up. "It broke," he finally muttered. I gotta get somewhere." The man nodded, stepping a little closer, but not too close. He crouched, setting his bag down and squinting at the bike. "Chain looks like it's been hanging on by a prayer for a while," he said gently. "I might have something in my kit." "You carry a kit?" the boy asked, a flicker of suspicion behind his question. "Old habit. Used to fix up bikes with my brother when we were kids. Guess I never stopped carrying tools." The man pulled a roll-up pouch from his satchel and unfurled it slowly, revealing a neat row of small wrenches, screwdrivers, and zip ties. The boy's eyes darted to the bag, then to the man's hands. "You don't gotta," he said quietly, almost automatically. "I know," the man replied, already kneeling beside the bike, "but I want to." He worked in silence for a moment, threading the chain back onto the sprocket, testing the alignment, hands moving with the efficiency of experience. The boy hovered, shifting from foot to foot, unsure whether to stay or bolt. "What's your name?" the man asked casually, not looking up. The boy hesitated. "Evan." "Evan," the man echoed. "I'm Theo." More silence, filled only by the faint whir of chain links snapping into place. Theo glanced up once, offering a half smile. "You heading to school?" Evan shook his head. "Errand." Theo didn't press. Something about the boy's tone said the subject wasn't open for expansion. He respected that. "All right, Evan," he said, tightening the last bolt and wiping his hands on a rag. "You're patched up for now. Not perfect, but she'll ride. Just try not to shift too hard or go over any bumps." Evan nodded, gripping the handlebars. "Thanks," he said, eyes not quite meeting Theo's. "You got family nearby?" Theo asked, his voice still easy, casual. Evan shrugged. "Kind of." Theo studied him, the way his eyes didn't land anywhere for more than a second, the way he guarded even simple responses like they were secrets. He recognized it. He'd seen it before, once in the mirror, many years ago. "Well," he said, standing up and repacking his tools, "if that chain gives you trouble again, I'm usually around this neighborhood. Work out of the community center on 12th. Evan nodded, already pushing off. Oh, okay, he said quickly. And then he was gone, pedaling with a lurch that evened out as he picked up speed. Theo watched him disappear around the corner and lingered for a moment, then sighed and slung his bag over his shoulder again. Across the street, unnoticed behind the tinted glass of a parked black SUV, a woman sat watching. Her hair was swept up in a low, elegant twist, and she wore dark glasses despite the overcast sky. She said nothing, just sipped from a travel mug and stared through the windshield long after the boy had vanished from view. Her phone buzzed. She answered. Yes, she said softly. He helped him again. A pause, then, no, he didn't recognize him. Not yet. Another silence. Then she clicked off the call and returned her eyes to the street where Theo was now walking in the opposite direction, unaware of the eyes that had tracked his every move. In her lap was a folder, thin but neat, with a name printed across the tab. Theodore Rayner. Beneath it, tucked carefully behind a paperclip, was a photograph, aged, creased, the edges curling. It showed two boys, arms slung around each other, smiling at the camera with the unguarded joy of childhood. One was unmistakably younger Evan. The other was Theo, but younger, less worn down by life, eyes brighter. She reached for the photo, brushing her finger over it gently. Almost there, she whispered. Theo didn't think much of the encounter for the rest of the day. He had errands to run, papers to grade, though he wasn't a teacher anymore, just someone who taught adult classes at the community center where no one cared about grades or transcripts, only whether they could read a bus schedule or fill out a job application without shame. His work, like most of his life, had become quiet, steady, rooted in the kind of purpose that didn't attract attention but mattered all the same. That night, as he sat in his small apartment above the community center's gymnasium, he poured himself a cup of tea and eased into the worn armchair near the window. Rain tapped lightly on the glass, soft as breath. He flipped through his notebook, a collection of lesson plans and loose ideas, and paused when a small smear of grease appeared on the page. Evan, the boy with the broken bike and the wary eyes. Theo thought about the way the kid had thanked him. Not with gratitude exactly, but with the weary resignation of someone unused to kindness. It tugged at something in Theo's chest, something he didn't often indulge. He remembered being that age. He remembered what it felt like to need help and to be too proud, or too scared, to ask for it. He remembered his sister, too, Sarah, always watching, always protecting, until the day she left. He closed the notebook and stared out at the darkened street. He hadn't heard from Sarah in over a decade. No calls, no letters, just vanished, like smoke from a blown-out candle. He didn't even know if she was alive. But in another part of the city, on the top floor of a gleaming high-rise, Sarah Rayner, formerly just Sarah, was very much alive. She stood barefoot in her penthouse kitchen, the lights of downtown flickering through the glass wall behind her. In one hand she held a glass of red wine. In the other, the same photograph she'd carried with her for years, Evan and Theo, two halves of a whole. One she'd left behind, and one she'd spent the last 2 years trying to save. She'd found Evan 6 months ago in the worst kind of circumstance, sleeping in a shelter after escaping a foster situation that had turned violent. The details made her physically ill. When she'd found him, he hadn't recognized her right away. She'd aged, changed. But he'd clung to her in the end, with a desperation that reminded her of everything they'd lost. Bringing him home wasn't an option. Not then. Too many legal obstacles, too many risks to his already fragile sense of safety. So she placed him under the guardianship of a trusted friend in town, someone who could care for him quietly, discreetly. She didn't want news articles or attention. She wanted Evan safe, healthy, and, most importantly, free to choose who he trusted. She'd asked him, gently once, "Do you remember Theo?" Evan had looked away, voice quiet. I think about him sometimes, but I don't know if he'd want to see me." Sarah hadn't pushed. Instead, she hired a private security detail to watch from a distance, not to interfere, just to observe. And she waited. When the call had come that morning, he helped him again. She'd smiled for the first time in days. The next afternoon, Evan's foster guardian, a woman named Delia, pulled into the parking lot of the community center and parked beside the battered row of bikes. Evan sat in the back seat, fiddling with the zipper of his backpack. "You want me to come in with you?" Delia asked. He shook his head. "No, I think I'm okay." She gave him a long look, then nodded. "You've got my number. I'll be just around the corner at the library. Text if you need anything." He nodded again and climbed out of the car. Inside the community center, the air smelled faintly of bleach and rubber from the nearby gym. The sound of bouncing basketballs echoed down the hallway. Evan walked slowly, eyes scanning until he spotted the open door of a classroom. Theo stood at the whiteboard, his back to the door, sketching out a simple diagram for a job training session. His voice was calm, instructive, engaging. Evan didn't go in. He just stood in the hallway watching. After a few minutes, Theo turned, caught the movement, and saw him. He blinked in surprise. "Evan?" The boy hesitated, then offered a half-wave. "Hey." Theo walked to the doorway. "Everything all right with the bike?" Evan nodded. "Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks again for yesterday." Theo smiled. "You're welcome." They stood there for a beat, neither speaking. "You want to sit in?" Theo asked, gesturing to the class. "It's not school, just talking about stuff. How to apply for jobs, write a resume, that kind of thing." Evan shrugged. "Maybe next time." Theo nodded, not pushing. "Well, I'm here most days. If you ever want to talk or hang out or, fix bikes." Evan smiled faintly. "Yeah, maybe." He turned and walked away, lighter somehow. Theo watched him go, a question forming in his chest. How had this kid come into his life so suddenly, and why did he feel so familiar? Across the street, Sarah watched from her car. No sunglasses this time. Just her eyes, wet with the kind of tears she hadn't allowed herself in years. "Almost there," she whispered again. The next part of the story is underway. Stay tuned for the continued narrative. The next time Evan showed up, he wasn't alone. His bike was with him, of course. It always was, though now the chain stayed in place, thanks to the zip ties and spare link Theo had fitted 2 days before. But this time, something had changed in his posture. He wasn't just wandering by or dropping a quick thanks. He had come with purpose, a quiet one that he carried in the way his eyes met Theo's, with a second more confidence, a second less fear. It was Saturday, mid-morning, and the community center was quieter than usual. Most people were in the gym or at the farmer's market 2 blocks away. Theo was sitting at one of the folding tables in the common room, marking through a stack of grant applications for the GED Scholarship Fund. He looked up when he heard the familiar creak of the entrance door. Evan stood there, holding a folded piece of paper in one hand, his thumb running over the crease like a nervous habit. "I wanted to ask something," Evan said. Theo gestured to the seat across from him. "Shoot." Evan hesitated, then stepped forward, sliding into the chair with slow, cautious movements. He placed the folded paper on the table, but didn't let go of it yet. "My bike. It's not just the chain. The brakes are bad too, and the gears skip sometimes. I know you already helped, and I don't want to be annoying or anything." "You're not," Theo said simply. Evan's eyes darted to him, then back down. I want to fix it, myself. I don't know how." Theo leaned back in his chair. "That's a good goal. I figured, maybe if you showed me." For the briefest moment, Theo's throat tightened. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the way Evan asked, not like a kid asking a favor, but like someone trying to earn a place at the table, like someone used to being told no and preparing for it. "All right," Theo said. "Bring it by tomorrow morning. I've got a toolbox out back and we can go through it together. Evan looked up. Really? Sure. Evan smiled, not a full one, but real. And he finally let go of the paper, sliding it across the table. I tried to draw the bike, like where it's messed up. It's not good, but... Theo unfolded it. The sketch was clumsy, but detailed. Arrows pointed to problem areas, with scribbled notes. Grinds here, skips this gear, pulls left when braking. It wasn't bad at all. This is good, Theo said, tapping the paper. You've already got the eye for it. We'll make a mechanic out of you yet. Evan beamed before catching himself, wiping it away like he didn't want to seem too eager. Cool. When he left, Theo kept the paper. He didn't see the black SUV parked at the far end of the street, half hidden by a hedge. Inside it, Sarah watched through the one-way glass, a quiet ache building in her chest. She didn't cry, not anymore, but something deeper pulled at her ribs like a reminder of everything she'd once promised her little brother. She remembered the last day they'd seen each other, the shouting, the slamming door, the silence after. She remembered being 17, trying to shield Theo from the foster system when their parents had died in a car crash. She remembered failing. Theo had ended up with a different family, one that didn't last long. Sarah aged out before she could fix anything. Then college, then opportunity, then the guilt of moving on while he stayed behind. Her first real paycheck from a tech startup had gone entirely into a fund she opened in his name. He never used it and he didn't know it existed. Now, years later, Sarah had more money than she could spend. She'd built a company, sold it, reinvested in two more, and became something of a myth in Silicon Valley. But none of it filled the silence between them. And now, watching him gently care for a boy he didn't recognize as blood, her heart ached with the weight of time lost. The next morning, as promised, Evan showed up with his bike. Theo was already outside, sleeves rolled up, toolbox open on the picnic bench behind the center. The smell of coffee mingled with cut grass as Sunday quiet held the neighborhood still. Evan wheeled the bike over, his backpack slung across his shoulders. He looked different already, more grounded, more present, like he had a destination. "Ready?" Theo asked. Evan nodded. Theo guided him through the basics, how to check the brake pads for wear, how to tighten the calipers, how to align the derailleur so the gears shifted cleanly. Evan watched closely, asked questions, tried with his own hands. He got grease on his face, scraped a knuckle, cursed under his breath, and apologized immediately. "Don't worry," Theo said, handing him a rag. "Bikes forgive profanity. It means you care." Evan laughed, surprising them both. They worked for nearly an hour. By the end, the bike glided like new. "You did that," Theo said, wiping his hands. "Not me. I just showed you how." Evan nodded, looking at the bike with something close to pride. "Thanks, Theo." The name came out like second nature, and for the first time, Theo felt it. The familiarity, the strange way this kid felt like a part of something forgotten. "You ever fix up a bike before?" he asked, trying to sound casual. Evan shrugged. "I don't think so. Maybe? I don't know." "Maybe?" Theo raised an eyebrow. Evan paused. "When I was little, I think I lived with someone who fixed stuff, or maybe that was a dream." Theo felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. He didn't know why. But something about the way Evan said it made him feel like his past was reaching out from behind a curtain he hadn't opened in years. "Do you remember where?" Evan shook his head. "It's all kind of blurry. I was in a bunch of places." Theo nodded slowly. "I get that." Evan looked up at him, brows furrowed. "You do?" "I was in the system too when I was younger, after my parents died." There it was, a flash of recognition in Evan's eyes, so brief Theo almost missed it. "What were their names?" Evan asked suddenly. Theo blinked. "David and Elise Rayner?" Evan took a step back, breathing faster. "Rayner?" Theo stood, his mouth going dry. "Yeah, why?" Evan stared at him. "My mom, she used to call me Evan Rayner." The world shifted. Theo stepped forward slowly, carefully. Your mom? I don't remember her face, but she called me that. I thought I imagined it. Theo felt his knees go weak. He reached out, gripping the edge of the bench. Do you know her name? Evan's voice dropped. Sarah. It hit like a wave, cold and undeniable. Theo sat down, hard. Evan stared at him, eyes wide, breathing shallow. You're her son? Theo whispered. Evan looked down at the bike they just fixed together. She said she had a brother once, but he didn't want to see her. Theo's throat closed. No, he said hoarsely. No, that's not true. He stood, his chest heaving, mind racing through the years. The letters he never sent. The birthdays that passed in silence. The questions that never got answers. All this time Sarah had been out there, and she had a son. And now that son stood in front of him, grease on his hands, eyes too old for his age, saying he didn't believe she ever meant to stay away. I didn't know, Theo whispered. I didn't either, Evan said quietly. Across the street, the SUV's door opened. Sarah stepped out. No sunglasses, no pretense. She stood still, watching them. Evan turned. His mouth fell open. Theo followed his gaze. And time stopped. Their past had returned. And this time, no one was walking away. Theo didn't speak at first. His feet moved, but slowly, like his body understood something his mind hadn't caught up to. Evan took a small step back, eyes fixed on the woman who now stood beneath the dull morning sky, her coat wrapped tight, face pale and stunned. Sarah, Theo said. It wasn't loud, it wasn't a question. It was a name carried on breath, familiar and foreign all at once, like a song you hadn't heard in years, but knew by heart. Sarah didn't move. I thought you were dead, he said, louder now. The words pierced the stillness between them, cracked open the air like a clap of thunder. His voice was trembling, part anger, part disbelief, but mostly just aching. Years of silence had piled up like snow, and now they were melting, rushing toward him in a flood. I thought you left me, he added. Her lips parted, but nothing came out at first. Then, in a voice so soft it almost dissolved into the wind, she whispered, I didn't know how to come back. Theo let out a sound, part laugh, part broken sob. That's not an answer. I know. He took a step closer. Evan stood frozen beside the bench, his fingers curled into the edge of his backpack straps, watching the two adults who were strangers to him in so many ways, yet inexplicably tethered. I searched for you, Theo said. Every year I sent letters. I left messages. No one ever replied. Sarah nodded slowly, guilt etched into every line of her face. I was angry at first, at everything, at the world, at how we lost everything, and then I got scared. I thought if I reached out too late, it'd only hurt more. So you let me think you were dead. I let myself pretend I was. A silence stretched out. The wind stirred the hem of her coat, the ends of Theo's sleeves. Evan shifted his weight, the rubber soles of his shoes scraping the pavement. He didn't know what to do, whether to run or stay or say something. But he stayed. Theo looked over at him, his chest rising and falling, the edges of his expression softening. Is he yours? Sarah looked down, then nodded. Yeah, Evan's my son. Theo turned fully toward Evan, really seeing him now, not just the boy with the broken bike, or the guarded eyes, or the tired voice, but as something more, as blood, as family. He crouched down slightly, eyes meeting Evan's at level. You knew my name? Only that it was Theo. She told me a story once when I was little, about her brother. I didn't know if it was real, or if it was just something she made up to help me sleep. Theo exhaled, the air hitching in his throat. It was real. I didn't remember much, Evan added. Just the name, and a bike. You helped me fix it. That's when it started to come back. Theo's voice cracked. I used to fix bikes when we were kids. Sarah and I, that was our thing. Sarah stepped closer now, unable to hold back anymore. I didn't know how to explain everything, Theo. Not after all that time. Evan needed help, and I had resources. I had to keep him safe. "You're rich?" Theo asked, the absurdity of it making his voice flick up. "You live in an SUV now?" Sarah managed a small laugh through the tears welling in her eyes. "Not in it, but yeah. I made a life. I built something. I tried to do good with it. I tried to help where I could. But not me." She flinched. "I wanted to," she said so many times. "But the longer I stayed away, the harder it got. I didn't think you'd forgive me." He was quiet a long time. Then he looked at Evan again. "You're in foster care?" Sarah shook her head. "Not anymore. I arranged something. Private guardianship. Legal. He's been with Delia. She's good. He's been safe." "But why?" "Because I wasn't ready," she admitted, "to be a mom. Not properly. I didn't want to hurt him with my unfinished pieces." Theo stood upright, his hands dropping to his sides. "You should have told me. I would have come. I would have helped." "I know that now." More silence. Then Evan stepped forward, voice small but steady. "Can we go somewhere? Talk? Just not here?" Theo nodded. "Yeah, I know a place." They ended up at a park not far from the community center, a place where the trees whispered with age and the benches weren't yet cracked. The three of them sat on a stone ledge by the duck pond. Theo handed Evan a bottle of orange soda he'd picked up on the way. Classic, fizzy, familiar. They didn't talk at first. They just sat. Eventually, Theo spoke. "When we were kids, Sarah used to sneak into the garage and steal the patches off my jeans. Said she wanted to sew them into her notebook, like pieces of my armor." Sarah smiled faintly, eyes glossy. "You always tried to protect me. You always ran ahead." She looked over at Evan. "I didn't know I was pregnant when I left. Found out too late, and by then, I was already living like a ghost." Theo rubbed his hands together. "How did he end up alone?" Sarah's voice cracked. "His father passed when Evan was 4. I didn't handle it well. I spiraled. Then one day, I left him with someone I thought I could trust. I thought I'd come back in a week." Her voice broke completely. It turned into months. Evan watched her carefully, his small fingers tight around the bottle. "I waited for you." "I know," Sarah said, tears rolling now. "And I'm so sorry, baby. I've been trying every day to make it right." Theo reached out slowly and placed a hand on Evan's shoulder. The boy flinched at first, then leaned into it ever so slightly. "I'm here now," Theo said, "and I'm not going anywhere." Sarah looked up at him. "You still want anything to do with me?" "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "But Evan, he's blood, and I'm not losing him too." Evan looked between them. He didn't speak, but he reached out and took one of Theo's fingers, wrapping his smaller hand around it. And for a moment everything else fell away. Across the pond, ducks scattered into the water. Wind stirred the leaves above them. Time moved, but slower. Because some reunions don't come with fireworks or speeches. Some come with broken chains, grease-stained fingers, and quiet forgiveness beneath gray skies. And sometimes that's enough to begin again. The afternoon light had softened by the time they walked back toward town. Evan pushed his bike slowly beside Theo, the front wheel wobbling slightly as it caught the edge of uneven sidewalk slabs. Sarah trailed a few paces behind, arms wrapped around herself, her eyes scanning the town she'd once left without a goodbye. It hadn't changed much. The streets were still cracked, the storefronts still worn at the edges, and the same old bench outside Clyde's barber shop still held the weight of men talking about weather and wars long past. Evan looked up at Theo. "You're really my uncle?" Theo nodded slowly. "Yeah, guess that makes me the old guy in the family now." Evan cracked a tiny smile, the kind that didn't quite stretch his face, but warmed the space between them. "I didn't know I had family." "You've got more than you know," Theo said. "Maybe not all of them stuck around, but some of us are still standing." He didn't look back at Sarah when he said it, but she heard him. She felt every word. They reached the corner of 12th and Merrill, where the community center sat like an old friend waiting on the porch. The mural on the brick wall out front, painted by local kids with more heart than experience, was faded now, but it still told a story. Two hands reaching across a divide, clasping. Above them, in bright blue spray paint, someone had written, "Where hope lives quietly." Evan tilted his head to study it. "Did you paint that?" he asked. Theo shook his head. "Nah, but I helped some of the kids who did. That was years ago." "It's cool." "It is." They paused at the entrance. The center was closed for the day, but Theo had keys. He unlocked the door and let them in, flipping on the lights as they stepped into the cool, familiar air of the main hallway. Evan glanced around, eyes drifting over the posters and flyers, the clippings from local newspapers about scholarship winners and free dental clinics. "This place, it's kind of like your home?" Evan asked. Theo smiled faintly. "In a way, I sleep upstairs, shower in the locker room, teach in the classroom. It's not glamorous, but it's mine." "Do you ever feel alone?" Theo didn't answer right away. He looked at Evan, then over at Sarah, who had stepped inside but kept close to the wall, as if unsure whether she belonged. "I used to," he said, "but lately, not so much." Evan wandered toward the common room, running his fingers along the wall as he passed. When he disappeared around the corner, Sarah stepped forward, her voice low. "You're good with him." Theo kept his gaze on the hallway. "He's a good kid." "I'm sorry you didn't know about him sooner." He nodded once. "That's a lot of years, Sarah. A lot of years you didn't write, didn't call, and then you put him through all that." She flinched, but didn't argue. "I didn't deserve to be a mom," she said. "Not then. Maybe not, but he deserved a mother." Sarah closed her eyes, breathing in slowly. "I'm trying now. That's all I know how to do." Theo's voice was steady, but softer now. "You said you've got resources, money, a whole empire probably." She opened her eyes, wary. "If this is about—" "It's not. I don't want to check. I want him safe, grounded. I want him to trust someone again. Maybe that starts with both of us showing up, consistently." She nodded, swallowing hard. "You'd do that?" "I already did, before I knew who he was. I'm not about to stop now." From the back of the hallway, Evan's voice floated forward. "Theo, there's a photo of you on the wall." Theo raised his eyebrows and walked toward the voice. In the common room, one of the bulletin boards had a collection of snapshots from past events, holiday dinners, graduation ceremonies, volunteer days. Evan was standing in front of one that showed a younger Theo, maybe late 20s, surrounded by a group of scrappy kids. He had his arms around two of them, grease on his shirt, grinning like someone who had just fixed 20 bikes in a row. "You look happy," Evan said. "I was." Theo stood beside him, staring at the photo. "That was a good day." Evan was quiet for a long time. Then, softly, "I want to be in one of these." Theo looked down at him, startled. "You mean, like, in a picture?" Evan nodded. "Yeah, like part of something." Sarah stepped into the room, her breath catching at the sight of her son standing there with her brother, two people she had loved from a distance, both unaware of each other until fate, or luck, or guilt, had pulled them into the same frame. Theo turned to her. "You want to take it?" Sarah blinked. "Me?" "You've been watching from a distance long enough. Might as well step in." She hesitated, then reached into her coat pocket and pulled out her phone. The lens caught the light as she lifted it, hands slightly shaking. Evan stood beside Theo. He didn't smile at first, but then Theo leaned down and whispered something. Evan laughed, a real laugh, surprised and sharp and fleeting. And Sarah, her throat tightening, took the shot. Click. A moment frozen. A broken line reconnected. Later they sat together outside the center, on the same bench where Theo had once shared coffee with a man struggling to pass his citizenship test, where a girl named Ramira once waited 2 hours for her brother to come home from juvie. The bench had heard hundreds of stories, and now it held one more. "I want to stay here," Evan said. Theo turned to him. "You don't want to go back with Delia?" "She's nice," Evan said, "but this feels more like—" He trailed off. Theo filled in the word. "Home?" Evan nodded. Sarah exhaled slowly. "We can make that happen." "I'll need to figure out the paperwork," Theo said, "but I'll do it, whatever it takes." Sarah's hands trembled in her lap. "You're better at this than I am." "Maybe," he said, "but we both get to try again." She nodded. The sun was dipping low now, casting gold across the pavement. Street lights clicked on, one by one. Somewhere down the road a child called out for his dog, and the bark that followed was joyous and free. Theo stood, stretching his back. "You hungry, kid?" he asked Evan. Evan grinned. "Starving." "There's a diner around the corner. Not fancy, but they've got pancakes that could change your life." "I like pancakes. Who doesn't?" They walked down the sidewalk together, uncle, nephew, sister, trailing behind them, watching them with eyes full of memory and hope. They didn't talk much on the walk. Sometimes words just clutter the air when what matters is the sound of footsteps side by side. The bell above the diner door jingled as they stepped in. The waitress smiled from behind the counter. "Just the three of you?" Theo looked down at Evan, then over at Sarah. "Yeah," he said, "3 for now." Ian slid into the booth. Theo followed. Sarah sat across from them, unsure if she was still dreaming. When the waitress returned with their drinks, she glanced at them and smiled. "You all look like family." Theo met her eyes. "We are." And for the first time in years, that didn't feel like a hope or a lie. It felt true, solid, like a chain finally repaired. Back at the community center, a fresh photo was being printed by the front desk. It would go on the bulletin board. Another face, another story, another bond forged not by blood alone, but by choice, by healing, and by the quiet power of people willing to help each other fix what's broken, even if it starts with something as small as a busted bike. The next morning brought a hush to the town, the kind of stillness that clings to early hours before engines roar and school bells chime. Theo stood by the window of his apartment above the community center, a chipped mug of coffee warming his hand. Outside, the sidewalk glistened from the night's dew, and far down the street, the newspaper delivery truck rattled past, tossing bundles onto porches with clockwork precision. Evan was still asleep in the small cot set up near the corner of the room. They'd arranged it hastily the night before, cobbling together spare blankets and an old flannel Theo had stashed in his closet. It wasn't much, but the way Evan had curled into the warmth, sleeping soundly for the first time in what seemed like months, made it feel like a 5-star hotel. Theo sipped his coffee and watched him for a moment. How his chest rose and fell, the slight crease between his eyebrows that never quite faded, even in rest. The boy had been carrying more than his share of weight for far too long, and somehow, by some twist of fate or mercy, he'd landed here. Not just in Theo City or on his block, but right into his hands. He turned away, walking quietly to his desk and flipping open his laptop. He pulled up the local social services forms, reading through the guardianship applications line by line. He had no idea how long it would take, but he'd start. Today, now. He didn't need to be perfect. He just needed to be better than whatever came before. By the time Evan stirred, sunlight had broken through the clouds, casting golden ribbons across the floor. He blinked a few times, then sat up, squinting toward Theo's desk. "You work early," he mumbled, voice rough with sleep. "Old habit. Comes with being a boring grown-up." Evan rubbed his eyes. "You're not boring." Theo looked over, one eyebrow raised. "No? You fix bikes, and you helped people. That's not boring." Theo grinned. "Well, in that case, you want to help me fill out some boring forms so you can stick around longer?" Evan stood. wrapped the blanket around his shoulders like a cape, and shuffled over. "Do I get to sign anything?" "Probably." "Cool." They sat together at the desk, side by side. Theo explained the parts he could. Evan asked questions when he didn't understand. When they reached the line asking for relationship to child, Theo paused, finger hovering over the keys. He turned to Evan. "What do you think, Uncle?" Evan nodded, but then hesitated. "Can I call you something else?" Theo's heart skipped. "Like what?" "I don't know," Evan said, suddenly shy. "Just, if it's okay." Theo closed the laptop gently. "You can call me whatever you want." Evan didn't answer right away. But later that morning, when they walked to the corner store for groceries, he tugged at Theo's sleeve and quietly said, "Thanks, Uncle T." It was nothing and everything at once. Later that day, Sarah returned. She brought a box of pastries from a bakery downtown, a tentative peace offering. She knocked on the community center door and waited, shifting her weight like someone approaching a judge's bench. Theo opened the door and stared at her. Then he opened it wider and stepped aside. She entered slowly, eyes scanning the familiar space like it had grown strange in her absence. Evan was sitting at a folding table sketching on a piece of paper. When he saw her, he looked up and gave a small wave. "Hey," he said. "Hey, sweetheart," she replied, crossing over and setting the box down. Theo leaned against the wall, watching them. "I figured I'd bring something for breakfast," Sarah said. Evan smiled. "Are there chocolate ones?" "2." He gave her a thumbs up and returned to his drawing. She glanced back at Theo. "He seems better." "He's safe, and he's not hungry. That's a good start." She nodded. "I'm glad it's you." Theo looked at her, this sister who had vanished for so long and now stood trembling in the same room with the boy she left behind. "Why didn't you tell me?" Sarah stared at the tile floor. "I wanted to, but I thought you'd hate me." "I hated me." "I never hated you, Sarah. I missed you. Every day." Her voice cracked. "I'm trying to fix it. I want to help now. I want to be part of his life." Theo studied her for a long moment. "Then show up, not just with croissants. Be here. Be honest. Don't vanish again." She nodded. "I will. I swear." For the next few weeks, they created a rhythm, mornings with Theo, evenings with Sarah. Sometimes all three of them sat together at the park bench or watched old movies in the community center's multi-purpose room. Evan laughed more, smiled without flinching. He built a model car from scratch. He wrote a story about a robot with a heart too big to fit in its chest. He started sleeping through the night. The court date for Theo's guardianship hearing came faster than expected. Sarah sat beside him in the waiting room, dressed in a navy blue suit that looked like it cost more than Theo made in a month. The judge asked questions. Theo answered them without nerves. When asked why he wanted custody, he said, "Because no one else should have to earn this kid's trust all over again. I've got it, and I'm not giving it back." The judge signed the papers. Outside the courthouse, Evan grabbed Theo's hand. "So what happens now?" Theo looked down at him. "Now? We go get lunch. And after that? Whatever you want, kid." Evan grinned. "Can we go back to fixing bikes?" Theo laughed. "You're going to have the whole town riding like pros by summer." From a nearby bench, Sarah watched them. She still didn't know what to call herself in this new version of their lives. She wasn't a mother in the traditional sense. She wasn't the sister she should have been, but she was here. And that had to be enough. One night, weeks later, Evan hung a new photo on the bulletin board at the community center. In it, he stood between Theo and Sarah, all three of them holding greasy tools and grinning at the camera. Behind them, a row of shiny, repaired bikes waited for pickup. Above the photo, in Evan's messy handwriting, was a caption, "My family helps people roll again." And in small print below that, "Thanks, Uncle T." Sometimes families are made of people who fix more than broken chains. They fix each other. The summer passed in a slow, golden stretch of days that smelled like cut grass, chain grease, and old books. In the back of the community center, Theo and Evan set up a makeshift bike repair station under a blue tarp held down by bricks and stubborn optimism. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. They called it the Rolling Fix, though Evan joked that it sounded more like a rock band than a workshop. Kids started showing up with squeaky brakes and bent rims. Adults came too, people who relied on bikes for work, for school, for survival. No one paid. There was a donation jar, sure, but most gave what they could: a cold drink, a sack of bolts, an extra pair of gloves. Theo taught Evan how to patch a tire, how to realign a warped wheel, how to listen to the click of a chain and know what it needed. Evan soaked it all in, asking questions, cracking jokes, getting his hands dirty like it was the most natural thing in the world. Sarah came by nearly every afternoon. Sometimes she brought iced tea, sometimes she just sat on the bench near the door and watched. She never interrupted, never hovered. She was learning the rhythm of their lives, not inserting herself, but weaving gently into the spaces where she was welcome. One afternoon, as Evan tightened a brake line on a dented red Huffy, he looked up at Theo and said, "Do you think we could do this, like, forever?" Theo glanced over, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Fix bikes? Help people, like turn it into something." Theo leaned back on his stool. "You mean a business?" Evan shrugged. "Or a charity. Or whatever it's called when people come and we fix their stuff and they don't feel weird about it." Theo nodded. "Yeah, I think we could." They started small. A flyer printed in the community center office on yellow paper that curled at the corners. It read, "Need a fix. Rolling Fix Bike Co-op. Free repairs. Donations welcome. Saturdays, 10 a.m. 2 p.m. behind the center." Sarah saw the flyer and asked, "Want help making a website?" Evan beamed. "You know how to do that?" She grinned. "A little." By the next weekend, they had a website. It wasn't fancy, just a single page with a photo of Theo and Evan, grease-streaked and smiling, a brief mission statement, and an email address. But it worked. The first message came from a grandmother in the next town over. The second was from a teacher who wanted to bring her students to learn bike repair as part of a summer elective. The third was from a man in Chicago offering to donate spare parts from a closed shop. Within 2 months, they had more bikes than they could store. Theo's quiet life shifted. It didn't explode. It didn't flip upside down. It simply grew. The routine changed shape to fit the new days: morning repairs, afternoon lessons, evening paperwork for the nonprofit status Sarah insisted they apply for. The nights were quieter still, spent with Evan on the rooftop staring at the stars, trading memories like baseball cards. "Did you ever have a dog?" Evan asked one night. "Yeah," Theo replied. "Her name was Cassie, big mutt. Smelled like wet towels." Evan laughed. "I want a dog." "Maybe someday." "Can we name it something weird?" Theo grinned. "Only if it listens when you call it." "Fair." On a Tuesday in early September, Sarah brought something unexpected: a small, polished wooden box. "I kept this," she said, placing it in Theo's hands. "All these years. I couldn't open it without feeling like I'd broken everything. But I think you should have it now." Inside were relics of a childhood lost, old birthday cards, a comic book they'd made together, a cassette tape labeled Road Trip Mix, and a tiny envelope containing a lock of hair and a name tag from a school backpack. Theo stared at it all, heart aching. "You kept it?" "I kept everything," she said, "even when I couldn't face you." He didn't speak, but when he looked up at her, there was something in his eyes that told her the door she'd once slammed had cracked open again. That weekend, they hosted their first community bike fair. The parking lot behind the community center transformed with tents, music, free snow cones, and a bounce house donated by the local fire department. Sarah coordinated a raffle. Theo manned the repair station. Evan gave tours of their workshop, proudly explaining the difference between cable and hydraulic disc brakes to anyone who would listen. People came. not just from the neighborhood, but from towns over. Veterans who used their bikes to get to appointments, mothers with strollers, and toddlers clinging to their knees. Teenagers who had never owned anything new and now rode away on freshly tuned wheels, heads high. Evan climbed onto the small makeshift stage near the end of the fair, his voice shaking just enough to remind everyone he was still a kid. "Thank you for coming," he said, reading from a note card. "We started this because someone helped me when my bike broke. He didn't ask who I was, he just fixed it, and that made me feel like I mattered. So now we fix bikes for other people who need that too." He looked out at the crowd, found Theo's face in the sea of smiles, and added, "Everyone deserves to ride." The applause came slowly, then built, rising like sunlight breaking through clouds. In the weeks that followed, something shifted in the town. People began referring to the back of the community center as the shop, and donations increased. One night, someone left a brand new set of tools in a locked cabinet with a note, "For the boy who gave my grandson his smile back." Another day, a local artist painted a mural above the workshop door, wheels transforming into wings, lifting a child into the sky. Below it, in gold script, "Mend what you can, ride what remains." On the first anniversary of the rolling fix, Evan surprised Theo with a gift. It was a hand-drawn logo, nothing fancy, just a bike with wings and the initials T&E. But on the bottom, in small letters, he'd written, "The shop that saved my life." Theo blinked against the burn in his eyes. "You saved your own life, kid. I just handed you a wrench." Evan grinned. "Still, pretty good wrench." Sarah framed the drawing and hung it in the community center lobby. Visitors often paused in front of it. Some asked for the story. Sarah would just smile and say, "It started with a broken chain." And if they stayed long enough, they'd hear the clang of tools, the laughter of two voices rising through the open windows, and maybe catch a glimpse of a life mended, piece by piece, not with miracles or money, but with patience, purpose, and love that showed up, stayed, and got to work. Autumn fell gently over the town, coating everything in amber light and crisp air that hinted at the season's turn. Leaves turned copper and gold, drifting down in lazy spirals that collected in street corners and danced across sidewalks. At the community center, the smell of fallen leaves mixed with the tang of bike grease and worn leather gloves. Evan had taken to wearing a wool beanie. One Theo claimed made him look like a miniature mechanic straight out of a 1960s garage. The joke never got old, at least not to Evan, who wore it proudly every day. One evening, just after the sun dipped behind the buildings, the three of them, Theo, Evan, and Sarah, sat on the rooftop. They had dragged up a small, rusted grill and managed a modest dinner of grilled cheese and tomato soup in paper bowls. Sarah had a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her hair pulled into a loose braid that made her look far younger than her years. "You ever think about what it'd be like," Evan said, spoon dangling over his soup, "if we had all been together from the start?" Theo didn't answer right away. He sipped his soup and watched the smoke rise from the chimney 2 rooftops over. Then he said, "I used to. A lot." Sarah's eyes shimmered in the twilight. "I think I was too scared to imagine it." Evan nodded. "I don't remember much. Just, this feeling, like something was missing." Theo looked over at him. "You found it now?" Evan shrugged. "It's not all filled in, but it's not empty anymore." Sarah reached across and brushed a leaf from his sleeve. "You're allowed to have space in your heart, Evan. Some people think you have to fill it all up to feel whole, but sometimes just knowing it's safe again is enough." Theo smiled. "You're starting to sound like a therapist." "I hired one," she said. "Figured it was time I stopped pretending I didn't need help." Evan grinned. "You're going to be a real mom." Sarah laughed. "I'm going to be the kind of mom you need, whatever that looks like." They sat quietly, listening to the city hum around them. Below, a train rumbled in the distance. A dog barked twice, and somewhere someone's wind chimes sang as the breeze shifted. In the days that followed, the bike shop grew busier. Word spread faster than Theo expected. Donations poured in. Rims, tires, brake lines, even helmets. A man from a nearby town who'd heard about them through Sarah's now viral social media post drove up with a truck full of brand new bikes. Some were too big, some needed tuning, but Evan's eyes lit up when he saw them. "We're going to need more space," he said. Theo laughed. "We can barely keep this one clean." Sarah stepped in, tapping on her tablet. "I may have a solution." They looked at her. "I bought the old hardware store down the street," she said casually. "You what?" Theo blinked. "It was for sale. I've been looking at the deed for weeks. The owners are retiring and didn't want to see it gutted by a chain store. I made them an offer they couldn't refuse. It's yours now." Evan's mouth fell open. "We have a real shop?" Sarah smiled. "You have whatever you want it to be." Theo stared at her, overwhelmed. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "I didn't want to force anything, but I want to invest in what you've built, you and Evan. This isn't charity, it's legacy." They toured the new space that afternoon. Dusty shelves, cracked tile, faded price tags that hung like relics from another time. But the bones were strong. The space breathed possibility. Sarah stood in the doorway as Theo and Evan moved through it, already talking about where to set up workbenches and how many stands they'd need for repairs. At the far end of the store, a back office looked out onto a tiny fenced yard. Evan peeked through the blinds and turned to Sarah. "Can we put a couch here?" She laughed. "You planning to nap on the job?" "I was thinking for the dog." Theo's eyebrows rose. "The dog?" Evan shrugged. "You said maybe someday." Theo glanced at Sarah. She raised her hands. "Don't look at me. He's your partner now." They named the shop The Spoken Flame, a name Evan came up with after reading a book of metaphors. "The spokes hold everything together," he explained, "and the flame keeps it warm." Opening day arrived with little fanfare and a lot of heart. They didn't cut a ribbon or hire a marching band. They just opened the doors, set out some cookies, and let the town come. People came in waves, curious neighbors, former customers of the hardware store, kids dragging broken scooters, and more than one grown man clutching a flat tire with sheepish pride. Theo manned the front desk. Evan took to the tools. Sarah hovered near the back, occasionally guiding people toward the donation box or handing out flyers. At one point, a woman in military uniform stepped through the door, holding a worn bike helmet in her hand. "I heard about this place from a friend on base," she said. "He said a kid named Evan runs the heart of it." Evan looked up from the chain he was adjusting, flushed red, and nodded. "That's me?" She smiled, warm and deep. "Then I'm in the right place." By the end of the day, the donation box was full. More importantly, so were their hearts. That night, Theo found Evan sitting on the back steps of the shop, staring up at the stars. "Big day," Theo said, sitting beside him. "Yeah. You okay?" Evan nodded. "Just thinking." "About what?" Evan tilted his head back. "How weird it is. A year ago, I was alone. Scared, cold, and now I have you. I have a place. I have a future." Theo reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small. A key. Evan looked at it. "What's this?" "It's to the shop," Theo said. "Figured you should have one." Evan turned it over in his hand, then looked up at him. "Thanks, Uncle T." Theo nodded, his throat too tight to speak. They sat in silence for a while longer, the stars glittering above them, the wind whispering through the alley, the key cool in Evan's palm. Later, when they walked back to the community center together, Evan said quietly, "We still getting that dog?" Theo smiled. "First thing tomorrow." And just like that, another piece clicked into place. Because in this life, some chains snap, some spokes bend, some wheels lose their way. But with the right hands, the right tools, and the right people beside you, anything broken can roll again. Winter crept in with a softness that belied its bite. The first snow came early, Late November, catching the town by surprise. Children danced through flurries on their way to school, their laughter echoing off the brick storefronts. At the Spoke and Flame, the front windows fogged from the contrast of cold air outside and the heat humming from inside heaters, Theo had installed himself with a little too much duct tape and exactly the right amount of pride. Inside the shop, the air carried the scent of motor oil, old rubber, and something sweet. Evan had taken to baking muffins with Sarah in the mornings, a new tradition they shared before unlocking the doors each day. They were learning what family looked like on an ordinary Wednesday morning: a tray of steaming banana nut muffins, a wobbly stack of mail from local donors, and the sound of Theo humming an old Otis Redding tune as he tightened the bolts on a donated tricycle. Evan was hunched over a BMX bike with a snapped pedal crank, grease smudged across his cheek. He had grown taller since that first day, the boy with the broken bike and the silence around his eyes. Now he talked, smiled, laughed. He had friends who stopped by after school not to ride, but just to sit on the shop steps and talk while he worked. They knew his story, pieces of it anyway. Enough to understand he hadn't always had this, that once he was invisible. But now he was Evan from the bike shop, and that meant something. That morning, Sarah arrived with a box under her arm and a snow-dusted beanie pulled low over her ears. She looked younger these days, less guarded. She'd scaled back her work, redirected her investments, and carved out space for Evan that was real, not a gesture, but a foundation. She didn't hover. She didn't try to buy his affection. She simply showed up, day after day. "I found this in a trunk I had in storage," she said, setting the box on the counter. Theo peeked over. "What is it?" "Photos, from before." Evan came over, wiping his hands on a towel. "From when?" Sarah opened the lid carefully, revealing stacks of glossy prints and faded Polaroids. A younger Sarah with braces and braids. Theo on a rusted skateboard. Their parents in old army jackets, standing in front of a beat-up station wagon. Birthdays, Halloween costumes, a shot of a tiny Theo holding a red plastic wrench in his chubby hand. Sarah grinning beside him in a cardboard robot suit. Evan sifted through them like treasure. "These are real?" "They're all we had," Sarah said softly, "before everything went wrong." Theo found one he hadn't seen in decades. Him and Sarah, maybe 10 and 12, crouched beside a tiny purple bike. Sarah was holding the handlebars steady while he adjusted the chain. Behind them, their mother watched from a lawn chair, sunlight glinting off her watch. "Look at this," Theo whispered, passing it to Evan. "Your mom and I started in a garage not much different from this." Evan studied it for a long time. "We should hang these up." "You sure?" Sarah asked. "You don't have to." "I want people to see," Evan said firmly, "where we come from, what we built." So they did. That afternoon they covered the far wall of the shop with a tapestry of their history. Photos, sketches, letters, even the original flyer from the community center's rolling fix. Customers paused to stare. Some asked questions. Most just smiled and walked away differently than they came. That night, as snow thickened outside, a woman knocked on the door after closing. Theo opened it. She looked tired, wrapped in a faded coat, her gloves fraying at the seams. Behind her stood a girl, maybe 7, holding a bicycle missing its front tire. "I'm sorry," the woman said quickly. "I know you're closed. We didn't know where else to go." Theo glanced at Evan, then back at the woman. "We're always open." They let them in. Evan fetched cocoa from the back. Theo fixed the tire while the girl sat on a crate and watched in quiet awe. Sarah took the woman aside, spoke gently, asked no questions except whether she needed help. The woman broke down. A lost job, a shut-off notice, a daughter's birthday tomorrow, and no way to get her to school. Theo said nothing. He just kept working. That's what they did now. When the tire was fixed and the cocoa was gone, the girl climbed onto her bike and squealed with joy. Sarah slipped a gift card into the mother's coat pocket. Evan walked them out, waving until they disappeared into the snow. Back inside, he turned to Theo. "That used to be me, didn't it?" Theo nodded. "Yeah, it did. I never want to forget that." "You won't." That Christmas, they didn't go big. They decorated the shop with pine garlands and handmade ornaments shaped like gears and bike chains. Sarah cooked. Theo carved a wooden sign for Evan's room upstairs, Mechanic's Den. Evan saved up and bought Theo a new torque wrench wrapped in recycled newspaper comics. They spent Christmas Eve in the shop with a handful of others, people who had nowhere else to go. They brought pie and stories. One man read poetry. A teenage girl played guitar. A boy Evan's age, who once sat silently in the corner during his first visit, stood and thanked them for making him feel seen. No one said Merry Christmas. They just said, "Thank you." After midnight, Evan sat on the roof, watching the snow fall like confetti from heaven. Theo joined him, their breath rising like smoke. "This was the best year of my life," Evan said. Theo smiled. "Mine too." Evan looked over. "You think Dad would be proud of me?" Theo blinked, startled. Sarah had told him once. Evan's father had been a quiet man, a mechanic who worked late, died too soon, and left behind more silence than answers. "I think he'd be amazed by you," Theo said. Evan nodded. "I hope so." They sat together watching snow coat the world in hush and light. A boy, a man, and somewhere inside the shop below them, a story still unfolding. Because sometimes family isn't just the one you're born into. It's the one that finds you when your chain breaks, when your wheel wobbles, when the road looks too long. And if you're lucky, they hand you a wrench, grease up their hands beside you, and say, "Let's ride." By the time spring arrived, the cracked sidewalks of the town had begun to bloom again. Grass fought its way through the seams in concrete, and daffodils popped up in patches outside the fire station, just as they always had since Theo was a boy. The mornings returned their birdsong, and the breeze that drifted through the front windows of the Spoke and Flame smelled faintly of hope and warming soil. Inside the shop, the rhythm picked up. Parents brought their kids in for post-winter tune-ups. College students on rickety 10-speeds came in for chain oil and tire patches. And more than once, a veteran with a cane or a tired look in their eyes stopped by, not always for bike repairs, but to sit, sip coffee, and talk with Theo, who never rushed them, never asked more than they wanted to share. Evan was thriving. There was no other word for it. His face had filled out, his cheeks flush with the flush of someone who didn't wonder when their next meal would be. He'd started keeping a journal, too. Theo found him scribbling in it most nights after the shop closed. Drawings, notes, reflections, goals. "It's not for anyone," Evan had told him once, "but I think someday it will matter." The boy who once avoided eye contact now walked the streets with a confidence that turned heads, nodding hello to shopkeepers and helping elderly neighbors carry their bags without waiting to be asked. One afternoon, he was spotted giving his own beanie to a little kid who said he was cold. When Theo gently asked him later why he hadn't mentioned it, Evan just shrugged and said, "I've got more." He didn't. Sarah had found a rhythm, too. She didn't try to parent Evan like she once feared she might. She became something more nuanced, a safe place. She still ran her businesses in the background, still answered conference calls and flew to quarterly meetings, but more and more her calendar was built around Saturday lunch at the shop, Wednesday movie night, Sunday morning pancakes. She was there. That mattered more than anything. On a warm Friday in May, something new arrived. It came in the form of a letter, thick cream-colored paper, delivered by hand by a man in a worn coat and thick glasses who looked around the shop like it was a museum. "Is there an Evan Rayner here?" he asked, voice deep and gentle. Evan looked up from his workbench. "I'm Evan." The man smiled and handed him the envelope. "Special delivery." Evan stared at it like it might be a trick. He turned it over, slowly broke the seal, and unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. Theo watched from across the room as the boy's eyes scanned the page, his brows furrowing, lips parting. "What is it?" he asked softly. Evan looked up, stunned. It's a scholarship for a youth leadership program in D.C. Theo blinked. "What?" Sarah had already crossed the room, reading the letter over Evan's shoulder. "It's real," she said, almost breathless. "They've been watching you. Someone nominated you." Theo raised an eyebrow. "You?" Sarah shook her head. "Not me, I swear." Evan looked overwhelmed. "They want me to talk to other kids about starting community programs, about the bike shop, about everything." Theo walked over and put a hand on his shoulder. "Do you want to go?" Evan nodded slowly. "I think I do, but only if I come back." "You better," Theo said, ruffling his hair. "We've got a summer tune-up backlog already." The trip came fast. 2 weeks later, Evan stood on the curb outside the bus terminal with a suitcase, his journal, and a new backpack Sarah had insisted he take. Theo and Sarah stood on either side of him, proud and quiet. "Okay," Evan said, after a long silence. "I'm scared." Theo nodded. "Good. That means it matters. I don't want to mess up." Sarah leaned in. "You won't. Just tell the truth. Tell your story." Evan looked up at Theo. "What if I don't know what that is yet?" Theo bent down, gripping his shoulder. "You know what matters. That's enough. The rest you'll figure out." The bus pulled in, and Evan climbed aboard, waving from the window until the town faded behind him. Theo didn't say anything for a long time, neither did Sarah. Then she reached into her pocket and handed him something. It was a necklace, thin leather cord, a small silver wrench charm dangling from it. "What's this?" he asked. "Evan had it made," she said. "He didn't know if he could say everything he wanted to say before leaving, so he made this instead." Theo held it tightly. "I'll wear it till he gets back." The summer arrived in full color after that. Business boomed. The shop gained a part-time volunteer. A high schooler named Mallory came in every Thursday and learned fast. Grease under her nails, questions, always at the ready. "Evan told me about you," she'd said. "Said you help people fix things that aren't just bikes." Theo had smiled. He's good with words. The letters came every week, postcards from D.C., scrawled notes on hotel stationery, a photograph of Evan in front of the Capitol building holding a sign that read, "Small tools, big change." He'd spoken at a panel, shared his story, talked about his uncle, his mom, his old life, his new one. The last letter came mid-July, a simple envelope, no stamp, just dropped off by a man who didn't wait for a tip. Inside was a note. "Uncle T, coming home next week. Bring the dog. I miss her more than you, even though you let her eat half your sandwich that one time. Save me a bike to fix, or at least a flat tire. Love, E." Below it was a small drawing, a wheel turning, flames behind it, and above it in bold black letters, "We roll again." When the bus arrived, Theo stood on the platform with a dog leash in one hand and a wrench charm hanging from his neck. Sarah was beside him, a thermos of hot chocolate in one hand, her other hand trembling just a little. Evan stepped off the bus with a new duffel, longer hair, and eyes full of stories. He dropped his bag, ran straight into Theo's arms. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They were a family built from silence, rebuilt with grease and grace, and held together not by blood alone, but by every broken spoke they'd ever dared to fix. And in that embrace, the road ahead stretched long and sure and full of light. Fall came again, like a quiet promise kept. The trees outside the spoke and flame burned red and gold, their leaves drifting down like embers over the sidewalk and collecting in piles beneath the front window. The bell above the door had started to squeak, but Theo hadn't fixed it yet, not because he couldn't, but because he liked the way it sounded now, familiar, like an old friend saying hello. Evan was home, not just for a season, not just between trips or school visits, but for real. His suitcase had been tucked away. His duffel was empty. He'd moved into the back loft of the bike shop with a real bed, shelves he built himself, and a chalkboard wall where he scribbled ideas and reminders and phrases like, "Ask why it's broken before fixing it." It had been 1 year since the day his bike chain snapped. 1 year since Theo had knelt on the sidewalk and said, "I might have something in my kit." They marked the anniversary quietly. No party, no speeches, just the three of them, Evan, Theo, and Sarah, gathered at the shop early before opening, sipping coffee and cocoa, while the sunrise climbed over the rooftops. A candle sat between them on the counter unlit. Theo struck a match and set the wick glowing. "To what started it all," he said softly. "To the broken bike," Evan added with a smile. Sarah nodded. "And to fixing what matters." They sat in silence for a while, not because they lacked anything to say, but because some moments are better honored without words. Later that morning, customers trickled in. Kids with scooters, an elderly man with a walker he swore still had a better suspension than his first car, and a woman Theo recognized from last fall, the one with the little girl and the broken bike. She was back. The girl taller now, the bike newer, but the gratitude in her mother's eyes hadn't faded. She handed Theo a loaf of banana bread and whispered, "You changed more than a tire that day." Theo smiled, thanked her, and returned to his bench. At lunch, Mallory, the teenager who had joined the shop months earlier, brought in sandwiches and news. "You guys made the paper," she said, unfolding the local weekly and slapping it on the counter. The headline read, "Rolling Forward, the bike shop that became a movement." A photo showed Theo, grease on his hands, crouched beside a wheel. Evan behind him, arms crossed and grinning, and Sarah at the edge watching them both, eyes proud and shining. Evan looked up from the photo. "Think we're famous now?" Theo chuckled. "Depends on your definition." Sarah leaned against the doorframe. "I'd say you're exactly the kind of famous the world needs more of." Evan tucked the paper away. "We should frame it." "Already printed 3 copies," Mallory said. "One for each of you." Theo handed her a wrench. "You're getting good at this." "Don't tell my dad. He thinks I'm going to be a doctor." The afternoon passed in a blur of repairs and laughter and new faces. A woman from 2 towns over brought 6 bikes strapped to her truck, each in some state of decay. A man with a long scar down his arm brought a custom-built trike for his son with cerebral palsy. They didn't ask for money, they just asked for time, and time was what the shop had plenty of. That evening, after they closed up, Theo and Evan sat out back under a string of lights Sarah had hung months earlier. The dog, Waffles, as Evan had named her, lay curled at their feet, snoring softly. Evan stretched, his hoodie bunched at the elbows. "I got an email." Theo looked up. "Yeah?" "From one of the kids I met in D.C. He wants to start his own shop, like this one." Theo raised an eyebrow. "You gonna help him?" Evan nodded. "I want to. Maybe this is just the start. Maybe we build something bigger." Theo smiled. "You dreaming big again?" "Always." "Good." They sat quietly after that, watching the stars blink into existence above the shop, listening to the hum of distant traffic and the occasional bark of a neighbor's dog. The kind of evening that wraps around you, slow and safe. Eventually, Evan turned to him. "You remember when I asked if I could call you Uncle T?" Theo chuckled. "Sure do. Thought I was going to cry in the middle of the sidewalk." Evan smiled, but his expression turned serious. "I've been thinking about something else, something more." Theo looked at him. "If you'd be okay with it," Evan said, voice lower now, steadier. "I want to change my name. Legally. To Rayner. Officially." Theo didn't move. His jaw flexed. His throat tightened. "You sure?" Evan nodded. "It's who I am. It's who I want to be. Not because I owe anything, but because you've given me everything." Theo looked down, hands clenched lightly around his coffee mug. Then yeah, kid, of course. Evan smiled. Cool. The stars kept shining above them, quiet and content. A few weeks later, the paperwork was signed, filed, approved. When the new ID came in the mail, Evan opened it at the front counter of the Spoke and Flame. He stared at the name for a long time before passing it to Theo, Evan James Rayner. Theo smiled, slow and wide. Welcome home, officially. Evan folded the card and slipped it into his wallet. Now I really need to fix that sign. What sign? The one over the bench, Evan said. It just says Mechanic's Den. I think it needs something more. What do you have in mind? Evan pulled out a folded napkin from his pocket. On it, in black pen, was a design, 2 hands passing a wrench. Above them, the words, Built from Broken. Theo stared at it. Let's make it, he said. And so they did. Together, like they always had.